let's get into the next session. It's my pleasure to introduce to you our next speakers from Phillips-Medisize. Our first co-presenter is a product development manager that plays the leading role in Phillips-Medisize product design and development efforts. With over 20 years of experience, the speaker has a strong project management background and leads a multidisciplinary design and engineering team. He adds value to the user experience and role of manufacturing development to bring products to market in a highly automated and regulated environment. Our second co-presenter is the principal industrial designer and a member of the Phillips-Medisize human-centered design team. He engages during the earliest stages of product development to ensure that the needs of the end users and key stakeholders are considered throughout the design process. This speaker earned a BFA Industrial Design from the University of Wisconsin-Stout and has specialized in the design of drug delivery devices and surgical instruments through his 25-year career. We are excited to host them on stage, where together they will be discussing bridging the gaps. Innovative leaders can smash stereotypical boundaries by fostering a culture of connection over conflict. Please welcome to the stage, with a warm round of applause, Justin Westendorf and Jeremy Odegard.
Thank you very much. And please thank Nicole as well. As she mentioned, she's a first-time presenter. Jeremy and I are both introverts, so we hung out, the three of us before this, all panicking a little bit. So
Yes. Thank you, and thanks to all of you for sharing this time with us. We're actually excited, even though we're introverts, to share this message with you. It's a topic that we're both passionate about.
yeah. I just want to set a little bit of context because we have gotten to hear from a number of different OEMs, but we are a little bit different. Phillips-Medisize is a contract design and manufacturing organization. So we're the strategic partner that was referenced in the last conversation. We're one of those people that you reach out to. Why that matters for this topic is that it means that we've gotten to look at and be a part of a lot of other people's cultures in addition to our own. But we're all kind of unified around this same thing, trying to improve patient outcomes so that they can live happier and healthier lives. The other question that we get a lot is, so you guys are part of Philips Healthcare, right? No, we're not. So we're the Philips with two L's, named after a small town in Wisconsin. We are the medical pharma solution division of Molex, actually, whose parent company is Coke. Again, the connection here is that across all of the different Coke divisions, Coke really focuses on trying to create a culture that, regardless of what industry you're in or how you're serving patients or people, you're trying to do that from a perspective of principles. So culture is something it's near and dear to our hearts in all of the different sites.
Right, and the last introductory slide here is a map. Justin and I are part of the Global Innovation and Development Organization. Our office is located near Minneapolis, but as you can see from the map, there are other green dots on the globe as well. And all the blue dots are representing our manufacturing facilities across the globe. When we have a global organization, it's even more important to focus on a culture of collaboration, because it's really easy to fit into a comfortable silo and stay there. And we need to pay attention to that and break that down.
Yeah, in fact, when Jeremy and I started, we were really just a Wisconsin company, and we turned into a global company overnight, literally. So, yeah, it matters there too. So just briefly on the introduction side then, as mentioned, I'm the product development manager at our site in Hudson, Wisconsin. But my background is in mechanical engineering, and when I came out of college, I started in one of those blue dots in commercial manufacturing. I was one of those stereotypical engineers who thought if you can't make it, it doesn't matter how great it is. So let's focus on efficiency. But I got really frustrated on that side of the business because I had ideas on how to make things better, but nobody would let me change anything. I learned about this thing called design verification testing and design validation. And you're like, no, I don't care. So I worked my way to the front end, and I've spent the last 15 years in product development where I could actually apply some of those ideas.
And I came from the other direction. I started as an industrial designer at a design firm, and I became frustrated because I was really excited about creative problem solving and serving end user needs, but I got frustrated when the design was compromised as it headed toward manufacturing, and I felt like there was a loss of attention to detail. So I joined Phillips-Medisize in 2001, and I did that because I wanted to be more closely connected to the entire development process.
Yeah. So why this topic? For me, again, self-professed stereotypical engineer, making that claim that it doesn't matter if it looks good or whatever, if it isn't manufacturable, it won't matter. But as I got to learn more about the different disciplines in product development, I realized a human factors engineer could say, to me, it doesn't matter how efficient it is to produce. If they use it wrong and they hurt themselves, it won't last in the market. And as I started to lead teams, I started to realize how that siloed mentality can really be hurtful to an organization.
Right, and likewise, as I began my career, I fell into some stereotypical design traps where I was placing a lot of value on designing beautiful objects, but I was not considering the perspective of engineering or regulatory or manufacturing well enough, and I had to learn to reframe my questions and listen differently in order to earn the respect of peers like Justin in order to be taken seriously. Right, so the message that we're going to share today takes the form of a bridge. It's built into the title, but building with purpose starts with a solid footing, and that's where we're going to start our message. Then we'll move into building some structural pillars on top of those footings in order to get to the bridge part of it where we create connection. So that's what you can expect from the presentation. We'll start with that and bridge the gaps.
So as Jeremy and I have kind of gone through our background, we have had the opportunity in one way, shape, or form to work together for 20 years. And that's given us the opportunity to pay attention as we went from a small Wisconsin-based company that was privately owned to moving into private equity, becoming global overnight, moving back into private ownership. It's given us a lot of opportunity to look at what is it that really solidifies us in a healthy culture, and what's important to really make sure that we can withstand challenge. We are not psychologists, and this is not the opening to our book tour, but we are people who have a passion for people and paying attention to culture.
That's right. We're not experts. We don't have magical powers, but we do care about this subject, and we've learned through failure some valuable lessons. The goal here is to share some of those messages or some of those valuable lessons that we've learned. And our audience, all of you, we're defining leaders as people who have influence. It's a very general definition of that term. So taking that definition, a leader can be an executive manager, or it can be a supervisor of people, a subject matter expert, or individual contributors. People at every level of the organization can lead through example.
Engineers young in their career, who just asked the last question. Sorry, and then just one more thing. The way that we go through that too, just so that you can kind of know what to expect, is after we talk about the footing, we're going to go through the structural pillars before bridging the gap. But before we do that, we want to do a little bit of an immersion activity, and this one will not involve audience participation, but there will be points in the conversation today where we do ask for you to participate. So, Jeremy?
Yeah, I'll be playing the role of a stereotypical industrial designer. It's not a hard role to play.
And I will be playing the role of the mechanical engineer, stereotypical mechanical engineer.
Right. So, Justin, I need 5 prototypes next week, and we need to make them as quickly as possible. They're for a preference study. Thing is, you need to shrink everything by 15% so it fits in this form factor.
Well,
Okay.
look, no, we're getting ready for engineering verification in like 2 months, and we got our own technical challenges. So you figure out how to make it look pretty later.
But that's 2 months away. You'll have to redo everything if it doesn't fit in this form factor, so just make it fit.
Yeah. Can you imagine what the electronics folks are going to say? I mean, we'd have to completely change everything about the hardware if we're going to do that.
Well, I'm not going to take the blame when we're late.
Well, I'm not going to change hardware.
Well, you're just not listening.
Well, I'm not going to be responsible for failure.
You're a gearhead.
You're a crayon chewer.
I know.
Let's blame software.
Yeah.
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 So, okay, now I do want to see some hands. Raise your hand if you've heard a conversation similar to that. You have, let me ask you, sir, what were the two groups that you've heard kind of go back and forth like that?
I would say often it's R&D, engineering, and manufacturing.
Just the last talk, R&D and manufacturing. How about another one? Who else? Mechanical and electrical. God, those two can never get along. Speaking as the mechanical person.
Yeah, right. It's easy for people to get entrenched in their positions, especially when there's time pressure. I mean, no one wants to be accused of failure to meet a milestone.
Yeah, and so as we start into this conversation, there's a couple things to recognize. Simple problems, especially less sophisticated devices, they can actually handle a little bit of that. You can get away with the stereotypical headbutting when decision-making isn't complicated. But let's be honest, most of the talks that we've seen today and the presentations and the devices that are being developed, there's nothing simple about them. They're all complex. And with complex comes the very high likelihood that there will be conflict. So first thing is, if you can accept that conflict is going to be a part of product development, then you should have a plan on how to address it.
Right. And one way of thinking about it is in a 4-box matrix like this. If we accept conflict and deal with it, then there are 5 possibilities. If people are willing to accommodate, then someone is going to be left holding the bag. If there's avoidance, no one will really get at the root cause of the problem, and it won't be addressed appropriately. If there's forcing, there will be resentment at the end of that kind of conversation. And a lot of people are comfortable settling for compromise, which is in the middle. But there's a risk there, too. Everyone will be disappointed about losing something if you aim for compromise. So what we're encouraging through this message is to aim for something higher, something that takes a little more work and a lot more courage and commitment, but aim for collaboration. And we've learned through experience that we're pleasantly surprised more often than not that a new solution that couldn't be envisioned alone presents itself.
Yeah. So as Jeremy and I were kind of talking through again, what are the structural, or what are the footings to this bridge that, given our experience and what we've observed in our own change and working with customers who are experiencing change, 2 themes kind of rose to the top, except it's the footing of a bridge. So sunk to the bottom of the river. The first one is really about valuing the contributions of others. In the skit that Jeremy and I did, what he wanted wasn't important to me, because only what I wanted was important to me. His was less important. It didn't matter as much. The other key footing is the difference between fear and support. So again, what were we looking for at the end? We wanted a scapegoat because we didn't want to be the group that was responsible for failure. It wasn't going to be my fault we were late. So the 2 footings that we're going to talk about a little bit more to get started are valuing what others contribute and a culture of support versus fear. So 4-box matrix, we'll put it into. On the y-axis, we're going to talk about the culture of fear, where at the top you've got a culture where people are scared to raise their hand or challenge authority or make decisions because they don't want not just themselves to fail, but they don't want the team to fail. They don't want to let the team down. In the bottom, we have that culture of support where people, if they don't know the answer, they're not afraid to go and ask somebody. They feel supported to challenge other people's ideas, so they feel support.
Yeah, and on the x-axis, we have a culture of empathy. On the left-hand extreme, we only value our own opinion and position. And on the right hand, it's not another extreme where you only value someone else's opinion. It's meant to say, I value your opinion as much as my own.
Okay, so here's the part where you get to participate a little bit. First, I want you to imagine you're in this culture where you feel that being responsible for why the team fails, but you're also in a very I value what I do. So who we find in this quadrant are the worried Wallies and the head-down Harrys. So here's where you participate. What are some things that you might expect to see, or some behaviors, or some things that worried Wally or head-down Harry might say? Raise your hand and speak, please. Anyone? Yes, sir.
You took my line. I was going to say, yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Excellent. I saw another hand back there. What's another one?
If they're like worried about failure all the time, they're probably really focused on all of the things that are currently going wrong,
Yeah.
or very close to going wrong,
Yes.
not really focusing on the things going well.
Right, not focusing on the things going well. We have 4 to get through, so I'm going to fill in a couple blanks, and you'll get to, whoever didn't get to participate this time gets to go on the next one. Withhold information, compete with others. They stay in their little silo, and they do only what's asked of them.
Right. Now, if we move down on the matrix, where people feel supported, that's got to be a good thing, right? If they feel supported, but they only value what they do, this is where we find narcissist Nancy and bossy Bob. What might we expect from them as far as cultural behavior is concerned?
This side of the room. This side's winning.
In the back.
In the back, yes. My way or the highway. Very good.
Exactly, yes.
How about another one?
It's okay, we have 4 pre-populated. Right, so this is where we find people thinking that their idea is the right way, and maybe they undermine a decision that they don't agree with by staying at it for a while and not accepting that that's the path forward. That's the pitfall in this quadrant.
Yeah. So then in the top right corner, where I value what you do, but we both exist in this culture of fear. This is where we find people-pleasing Paula and militant Mike. So what are some behaviors that people-pleasing Paula might exhibit, or militant Mike? Yes, sir. Say yes to everything. Yep. I'm overworked. I got too much to do, but I can't say no to anything. I fear letting the team down. What's another one? All right, you're gonna make me push the button. All right. One that I wanted to just point out is helping others at my own expense or the team's. This is one of those things. I've had people-pleasing Paulas on my team where they're not really the best suited person to do that particular job, but they don't want the team to fail. So they grab hold of it. They can't really do a very good job, and the team gets let down anyway, even though she was doing her best.
Right, and the last quadrant, of course, is where we're aiming. This is where leader Linda and team-based Tom live. This is where this is the foundation we're trying to promote, where people feel supported and they value multiple perspectives. And we'll talk more about that. But what could we expect from this quadrant? Any thoughts here?
Everyone knows this one, right?
This
Lots of hands go up, and
just click the slide.
okay.
This is where people start to advocate for others, and it's also where the best ideas win, regardless of who presents them. And again, this is where we are encouraging people to think about.
So just to self-reflect a little bit, there's huge opportunity here, leaders at all levels, right? If you're on a team and you're overhearing some of the conversations or the tones, they don't know what they're doing, or we can figure this out together, it gives you some indication of what type of culture actually exists. And remember that there is company culture, site culture, interdepartmental culture, and even project team culture. So regardless of what type of leader you are, or what level you're at, if you're a manager or an individual contributor, the key is they'll need somebody to lead them into a different quadrant.
Right. Now that we've established these footings, we'll build some structural pillars, and that will allow us to bridge the gaps.
Yep. So the first one that we're going to start with is discovering or creating a culture of mutual benefit, where we all win. And almost as legendary as the iceberg metaphor is the iPhone metaphor, but we're going to use that one anyway. Can you imagine being the engineer sitting in the room when he holds this unfunctional block up and says, and it's going to have a touch screen here, and you're going to have apps on it? What are apps? And it's going to have Wi-Fi. Like, the engineers, if they had the wrong culture, would have been in the word, well, I can't do that. None of that even exists. But fortunately for all of us, that wasn't the type of culture that they had. They had one where they started from, we can figure this out together. support and I value what you contribute. When you have that type of culture, then you can start to work the problem. All of the different disciplines. A simple tool that we use is we call what, who, how. What knowledge do we need? Who has the knowledge? How do we get the knowledge? Maybe it's Jeremy's got the knowledge. Maybe it's a completely different department, or maybe it's somebody outside of my organization that has the knowledge. But the point is, with the right culture, you can start to work the problem.
Right. The second pillar is the value of diverse perspectives. And there's a really logical and pragmatic reason why studying a problem from multiple perspectives makes sense. If you're only looking at a problem from one point of view, you're going to miss lots of important pieces of the puzzle. And we illustrated that through the skit earlier. If all I care about is a user preference study, and I'm not thinking about the downstream effects and just make it work, and he says, just make it pretty, that's insulting, and it can lead to all sorts of cultural problems, but also problems for the program. So a tool that we have employed is building this pyramid model where we encourage every team member across the organization to think about a product's usefulness, usability, desirability, and viability all the time, no matter what. And that by creating that expectation, it's a great top-down philosophy, but it's also a really powerful bottom-up accountability method where anyone can raise their hand at any time and say, this feels out of balance.
Yeah, so the example in the back of the room where electronics and mechanical don't get along, it doesn't have to be about you electronics need to get along with mechanical. It can be you electronics need to value these four things. You mechanical also need to value these four things.
Right. And the third pillar is about valuing what you understand and learning about what you don't. And empathy is the tool that we need to apply in order to get to the point where we can effectively understand another point of view. What we have here as an illustration is the Dunning-Kruger effect. I'm sure many people are already aware of what this is, but it's a tool that you can apply to your own self or your organization to try to illustrate where you might be on this cycle. If you're trying to learn about a new perspective, it's usually a very steep learning curve, but at some point you reach the peak and you say, oh, now I understand. And we call that the peak of Mount Stupid because that's where you say things that don't make sense and when you make false assumptions that cause trouble. Once you realize that and you continue to learn, you quickly fall into the valley of despair. And if you stay there, then you might be inclined to give up. And that's also wrong. So continue through the learning journey until you are feeling like you're starting to climb the slope of enlightenment, where you feel like you understand more fully another person's point of view, not to the point of being an expert, of course, because that's not realistic, but to the point where you can say, I understand this is complex and I need you to help me.
So then the fourth bullet point that we want to talk about is really about leaders setting the tone and expecting cross-functional collaboration, which you can't just sort of go in and declare. You can't come back from the talks today and say, we're going to be cross-functional. It just doesn't work that way. I want to talk about two terms that are kind of out there in literature, but I'm going to use them a little bit differently than how you might have heard about them. The first is passive leadership. And the way that I'm going to describe that is passive leadership sounds good. It's all of the right terminology. You're saying all the right things. And especially if you're messaging up, it sounds really good. But people around and beneath, it doesn't sound so good because they're not seeing it. The burden is on that other individual to actually do the work. Now, the obvious other side of the coin is active leadership, but I'm going to change that. I'm going to say authentic leadership. Where authentic leadership, you don't even have to say anything. The employees understand what you expect. Your teammates understand what you expect because they see it represented in who you are and how you behave. The employees know that they're safe and included because they're behaving like you are. So to illustrate this, we'll do a little Post-it note ping pong. where we talk about how something sounds on one side and how it might sound a little bit better. I create space for my team to work cross-functionally. The hole in that is that it's the team's responsibility to go and fill that space. So it sounds good, but what would be better is cross-functionality is a measurable expectation. Now I, as the leader, am just as accountable as the rest of my team because we've set a target on what cross-functionality means to us, and we're actually going to measure it and hold ourselves accountable to it.
Right. Another example, a passive leader might say, we talk about our guiding principles, and that's great. You should talk about your guiding principles. But what's even better is if we think about that more actively. I live out our principles, and I empower others to action. That's a much more powerful statement. If guiding principles are a poster on the wall and we point to them, they might just become viewed as noise, or even worse, hypocritical, if we're not acting out those guiding principles and demonstrating that they are real and expected across the organization.
Yeah. One that's a personal past sin of mine is this one. I have an open door policy. Just walk on by. My door is closed most of the time, but I have an open door policy. All you have to do is knock on the door. I'll give you the signal if I'm free. Then come on in and tell me your problems, or tell me how you think I'm doing as a leader. So that's truthfully like a personal sin. How I had to work my way out of that was I needed to go and start actively seeking it. I couldn't just say I have an open door policy, and by the way, I turned my temperature up, that's why my door is closed. I still needed to get that feedback and take the action to say it's not just words, I mean it. Tell me how I'm doing as a leader.
Right. And the last example here is we had a cross-functional session just last quarter. That's great, but it's not a one-time event. It has to be more than that. And the better representation of that is we plan for and celebrate cross-functional collaboration. So if that's true, it'll be obvious.
Now I'm starting to notice the clock. That's why you were trying to get me to keep going. Yours or mine? So now that we've established, we've talked a little bit about our cultural footing. We've talked about the structural pillars. Now it's time to talk about how we actually span the gaps. The through line in this whole conversation has really been trust. Trust is the thing that actually connects people from one side to the other, and it's based on those things that we talked about. There are a couple of different elements of trust, and I'll explain who we stole this from in just a minute. Logic, there has to be a reason why I should trust you.
Yeah, and empathy. It has to be obvious that I'm sincere when I say I value what you do.
And authenticity, I need to demonstrate vulnerability and humility and authenticity in order for you to be able to trust what I'm saying. So I mentioned that we borrowed this. There's a great talk by Francis Frey that we stumbled on while we were trying to prepare for this conversation. It's a TED Talk. One of the quotes that she has, trust is threatened when any of these things start to wobble, and this is the formula that she had come up with. The other is it's easy to crowd out the time and space that empathy requires. There's one more variable that we added, though, as we were kind of reflecting, and that's consistency. And consistency is a multiplier. If you do these things sometimes, then there isn't going to be trust. Trust gets eroded. At the same time, doing it 100% of the time, being that consistent isn't really attainable. But the more consistent that you are in these three areas, the more likely that when you stumble, when you trip up, there's going to be forgiveness and grace. So, summing up, leaving a little bit of time for questions, hopefully we've illustrated two key footings that are important in terms of setting a cultural foundation. The structural pillars that we went through, talking about mutual benefit and perspectives, shared objectives, and respectful challenge, and then ultimately trust being the thing that actually bridges the gaps.
We'll just close with a few words of encouragement. Everybody has influence in the organization, so be courageous, be a leader, break the stereotypical boundaries, and bridge the gaps. If Rocky and Clubber can do it, so can you.
So can you.
And now questions.
And now questions. Thank you. What did we mess up? Oh, yeah. Sure. Any questions? Yes.
Ready.
Thank you. In one of your slides, you had something about like a product that you're developing should be, there's usability, usefulness, desirability, and like viability.
Right.
Like my question is like, isn't that missing the feasibility part?
So the way that we describe useful is more of that engineering. It has to serve a particular purpose. So in the usefulness dimension, we assign things like, is it actually feasible? Viability is a little bit different in that it also has to be market appealing and produced at a cost that's reasonable. So we include feasibility in the more useful quadrant.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
In the back.
Some good cardio that I'm getting in.
Hi, my name's Eamon. Apologies for the accent. I'm not from around
Very
here, as you
welcome.
might know. I'm just really interested in your experience across culture. I mean, you talked a lot about trust building and being empathetic and everything. Maybe you could share some experiences of differences or maybe lack of differences that you find over the typical cultural boundaries.
I'll say a couple, and then if you wouldn't mind. Thank you for bringing that up. I will say that we were Wisconsin naive when for a number of years. And there are a lot of embarrassing stories, literally, where we just hadn't, as a company, thought outside of Wisconsin and Minnesota. When we went into private equity around 2010, and we acquired Medisize, and instantly were global and had all of these different people coming from different places, the first level that we noticed was the accent. Okay, you speak something different than I do. But we really started to pay attention, and because I guess I can say we didn't have a culture of fear, we had a culture of support. And because we were Wisconsin naive, we asked questions. It was just sort of in our nature to try to get to understand people better. So whether they were a customer or a new colleague in a different country, because we were coming from a place where we valued our own culture, it was natural for us to ask the types of questions to inform ourselves better. The third level challenge, honestly, was we sat in a place where we had a lot of that access, and the project teams didn't. And it took a couple of years for us to realize there's this huge mismatch between what we know and why aren't they behaving the way that we know that they should behave. We never told them. So about 5 years ago, we started to pay a little bit more attention to actually bringing them into those conversations, which is even better than we'll tell you what we know about culture, bringing them into the cultural experience.
Right, and just as an illustration of that concept, the project teams, the individual contributors recognized that communication style mattered more than we were acknowledging, and direct communicators and more passive communicators were offending each other, and it was leading to all sorts of issues. So we started a grassroots effort to help groom a more healthy culture, and not call it training, but call it a collaborative workshop where we learn from each other and exchange knowledge. We send people over to other sites in Europe and talk about these issues and learn from each other, and then bring that knowledge back. And it's not training; it's planned knowledge sharing.
Yep.
So that's just one example.
A minute left. Yes, sir. Thought I was going to have to tell a 1-minute joke.
We're lucky there's a question.
When you bring new people in your organization, how do you bring them into this culture? Do you explicitly train on this, or do they sort of learn by example?
Also an awesome question, and I'll try to be brief. It's twofold. One is that we are very fortunate that all the way up at the Coke level, there's very well established workshops and online. Like, culture is really, really important, and principles are important. But at our level, what's been awesome is that we've been at it long enough that there's so much critical mass that even during the interview process, the differentiator between a candidate interviewing with us and with somebody else is the way that our people, not our managers, but our individual people interact with that person. So it's staying at it long enough, staying at culture, making it important long enough that you create that critical mass so that it is grassroots, and that when the grass says, hey, we need some fertilizer to grow, they create something like the investing in relationships training. But consistency, it requires endorsement and support from people who can plan for culture and support it.
You want to close with that?
I think that's our time.
It is. But let's encourage people to
Sure.
stop.
So the little spinning thing, we did because we're product development people. So we created a little cutout if you are interested and want to have your own useful, usable, desirable, viable.
Yeah.
It's at booth 41.
Thank you.
Thank you.